Our third lecture for Module 1, we're going to discuss the different types of systems that exist. And these types of systems are economic systems. So it's very easy to confuse them with political systems and different types of political economies, but these are actually economic systems, and we're going to talk a little bit about how they're different, but you may see some similar characteristics, but again, they are different, and just because an economy is, or sorry, just because a country is considered a communist country does not mean that they necessarily have a completely command or communist economic system. So that's going to be a very important distinction as we're moving through. So just keep that in mind as we're discussing different types of systems. So first off, this picture here is going to show us the stark difference between the night sky life in North Korea and South Korea. So at the top of the screen, you see North Korea, and there's one sole patch of light that you can really see is bright city lights. Whereas in the South, in South Korea, much more light and economic activity you can see going on at night relative to the North. And so we're going to start to talk about, at one time, North Korea and South Korea were the same country, just Korea, and at which they separated and took two very different paths. That's going to lead to this drastically different outcome. And we're going to talk a little bit about how their economic systems influenced those outcomes. So when we're referring to economic systems, an economic system is a set of institutional arrangements and coordinating mechanisms that respond to society's problem. So we said society has an economic problem. There are scarce factors of production, scarce land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. But we have individuals within our society that have unlimited wants. So we have to make decisions as a society. And how we answer the questions and how we get to that point at which we decide which goods should be produced, who consumes them, how are they produced, all of that is going to determine what type of economic system we have. But in particular, we have two questions that each economic system must answer. And the first one is, who owns the factors of production? Who owns the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability? So the way that a society decides to answer that question is going to influence what type of economic system they have. The next is, what method is used to motivate, coordinate, and direct economic activity? So how are the factors of production motivated into producing goods and services? How do we coordinate those economic resources? And then finally, how is economic activity directed? How do we decide what goods and services are produced and who receives them? So these two questions are going to give us a good idea of what's going on in this economic system. How is society dealing with their economic problem? So again, we are going to just look at two ends of the spectrum. One end is the command system, and on the other end is the market system. And it's going to be very rare that we would ever see somebody that would say 100% command system, 100% market system. But again, these are the extremes. Most economies will fall in between these two somewhere. So first, to go through our command system, also known as socialism or communism. So again, we hear all the time people saying, well, I'm a socialist, or this country is a communist country. That's not necessarily what we're talking about. We're talking about the economic system, that who owns the factors of production and how do we coordinate economic activity. So the first question, who owns the factors of production? The government owns the economic resources. So the government is the primary owner of land. It's not, as in the United States, you have the ability to own land. That's not going to be the case under a command system. The government is going to own the land. They may also have a say in what type of occupation you go into. You don't necessarily have full decisions in what you have the ability to do for labor. And also that entrepreneurial ability. Many times when we're thinking about this command system, what we're thinking about is government ownership of business. It's not the individuals that own the businesses and receive the profits. Any profits would go directly towards the government. And then how is economic activity coordinated? Decisions are made by a central planning board. So there's either an individual or a group of individuals that decide what goods and services are produced, who gets those goods and services, and how much they have to pay for those goods and services. Again, this is different. So a classic example, we think of China as a communist country. However, in China, people have ownership of resources. There's the ability to own land. People get to decide what type of occupation they go into. And people can also decide what goods and services are produced and what goods and services they buy. That's not going to be true in a purely command system. So even though we think of China as a communist country, it doesn't mean they have a command system. All right, so some examples of a command system are going to be North Korea, which we already looked at one end of the spectrum, and then also Cuba is considered to have a command system. Very centrally controlled by the government owning the resources and government having a hand in the goods and services produced and who receives them. All the way on the opposite side of the spectrum is the market system or capitalism. Again, we often hear capitalism in terms of the United States. But again, the United States is not going to be a perfect market system. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we see this play out in the real world. So how does a market system decide who owns the factors of production? There's private ownership of resources in our market system. When we have a market system, the individual households own all the factors of production. They own all the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. And decisions are made in markets. So rather than having a central planning board, we see that supply and demand, which we're going to get into in the next module, supply and demand determines who gets the goods and what they pay for it. So the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom are all examples of market systems. There's capitalism, but again, they're not going to be perfect, and we're going to look at a little bit more about these. And so in our command system, North Korea is an example, and on our market system, we're going to see South Korea takes a market system, a capitalistic approach to their society's problem as they separated from North Korea. This is going to lead to huge differences in their GDP. So what does production look like in North Korea? $40 billion compared to $1.3 trillion in South Korea. And these are in 2014 numbers. GDP per capita, or how much production is occurring on a per person basis, or how much income on a per person basis. $1,800 per person in North Korea compared to $27,700 in South Korea. Huge difference. Amount of exports and imports. So how much are they producing for consumers abroad? How much are they consuming of that people are bringing into the country? Billions, hundreds of billions of dollars compared to just over $1 billion. And we can also see that agriculture as a percentage of GDP is significantly different. And this is what's going to really lead to that difference in the night sky between North Korea and South Korea. We see South Korea has evolved away from agriculture into a more service industry, into a more manufacturing industry, and now agriculture only represents 3% of their total GDP, and in North Korea, that still represents 23%. We can see it's still much more rural and much more dependent on agriculture. Huge differences between the two North Koreas that used to be the same country and now have separated and both chose different economic systems with very different results. All right, so also on terms of global, the Heritage Organization each year indexes for economic freedom. And so our 2016 Index of Economic Freedom is listed here. And we can see that Hong Kong is considered to be the most economic free, the most capitalistic society in the United States, or in the world. We can see Singapore, New Zealand, Switzerland, Australia, Canada, always among the top. The United Kingdom and the United States are always in that 10 through 12 ranking. On the other column, then we have the more command. So the higher the number, the more command or communist societies we see. And again, what you see is, even though we think of China automatically as a communist country, it's not at the bottom of the list. Countries like Iran, Congo, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and then Cuba and North Korea are considered to be some of the most communist societies. And again, how are they answering those two questions on who owns the factors of production and how do they coordinate economic activity? Not rated are some countries, and what that means is they don't provide enough information about their laws concerning these different items that the Heritage Organization ranks. And so it's hard to really understand these countries and how much economic freedom they have. So again, I would recommend, if you want more information or if you just want to kind of explore a little bit, this Heritage link that is over here on the right hand side is a great resource to use and to take a look at a little more in depth onto this economic freedom rating. All right, so how does the Heritage Organization, but also how do economists characterize a market system? So how do we look at a system, an economic system, and say, okay, this is a capitalistic society? And so again, we answered those two questions. We know there's private ownership of the factors of production. We know that economic activity is coordinated through markets. But what else is the case? And so private property is at the heart of the market system. It's the right of individuals to obtain, own, control, employ, dispose of, and bequeath land, capital, and property. So it's not just that you own your property today, but you can do what you want with your property. And someday you can give your property to whoever you want, whenever you want. And so it's that property is completely private, and there's not hands of the government within that property. Next is the freedom of enterprise and choice. Firms have the freedom to produce and sell any good of their service. So within the United States, obviously, we can't sell illegal drugs. Prostitution is illegal, and so that's one case where freedom of enterprise and choice isn't always the case. So in the United States, we're not a perfectly market system. The government does step in some areas, but we're talking about firms having the freedom to produce and sell goods and services that they choose. Whereas in a command society, we might see government ownership of those firms, so they don't have that freedom, or the government's severely limiting the amount of goods and services or the types of goods and services that can be sold. Self-interest. What makes our market system work is, remember, self-interested individuals, self-interested firms. And so each economic unit tries to advance their own goals. So that doesn't mean that people are selfish. It means that people act to maximize their utility. They're going to act in a way that is going to make them happy. So if that means working extra hours in order to purchase more goods and services, then that might be the case. Or if it means taking more leisure time, working less hours, then that's at the heart of the market system as well. These self-interested individuals that are motivated to maximize their utility. Next, competition. The presence of an independent economic buyers and sellers who have a choice to enter or leave the market. And we're going to talk more about competition in the upcoming lectures, but a market system, we see the governments promoting competition, encouraging firms to compete for business, and encouraging buyers to make those decisions. So competition also part of that market system. Markets and prices. So how is economic activity coordinated? Markets bring together buyers and sellers, and they decide on a common price. So we find buyers of a specific product, sellers of a specific product. They enter into this market. They determine the quantity that's going to be produced, and they decide at what price are we going to see this product sold at. And again, we're going to talk more about markets and prices coming up in our demand and supply modules. Then we can see technology and capital goods. One thing with a market system is that technology, capital goods, and the future become very important. And that's because individuals are motivated, businesses are motivated to continue to earn profits and revenues. And so they're all striving to advance technology, and capital goods are encouraged to be produced because they want to produce more goods in the future. Producing more goods in the future means more profits, more take-home pay for those individuals. And so when we're looking at market systems versus command systems, much of what we find in research and development, new development in the drug market, new technologies and electronics, most of them are occurring in market systems. Specialization is key within a market system. We find, so individuals are the ones that own the land, the labor, the capital, and the entrepreneurial ability. And when they own those four factors of production, they're going to use those factors of the production to their best of their ability. And what this means is that you're going to specialize in what you're good at. To make the most money in your career, it's going to be doing something that you enjoy and something you're good at. You're going to specialize your skills to produce what makes you the most money, and so or brings you the most happiness. And so specialization is key. If you own land, you're going to use that land so that you can earn yourself the most income. And so again, specialization is going to be that motivating factor behind the market system. The use of money is going to be also very important within our market system. So within the command system, what we see is that the government is the one that's coordinating economic activity. They're determining who gets the goods and services and how much they pay. Whereas in our market system, the people who are willing to pay the most, the people who have the money, are the ones that are able to purchase the goods and services, which often you hear as one of the complaints about this capitalistic society is that it forgets the poor. When we're talking about the use of money, that's exactly what you hear, is that the people who have the money are the ones that have the ability to purchase the goods and services. Active but limited government. In a market system, it's not saying there's no role for government. There is a role for government, but it's limited. It's limited to preventing market failures. And we're going to talk about market failures upcoming in the fourth module of this section. But we're going to have an active role in making sure we don't have market failures, but that's what we're limited to. We're not going to see the government entering into any sort of decision that has to do with something where there's not a government failure or a market failure. All right, so a quick quiz going over those characteristics. Determine whether you're more likely to find this occurring in a command system or a market system. So I'm going to have you pause it here, go through these 6 statements, determine, does this sound like something that would occur in a command system or a market system? All right, so first, the government regulates the number of businesses in an industry. Automatically, what you're going to think when you see government regulates is going to be a command system. This isn't always going to be 100% true. If we said something about a market failure, it could be a market system. But traditionally, whenever we see government regulate something, think command system. Individuals choose what type of job they enter into. This is that market system. Individuals own the factors of production. They get to decide what type of job they enter into. Government owns the majority of property and rents it out to citizens. Exactly the opposite. This is going to be that command system. The government owns the factors of production. Government regulates the price of many goods. Again, government is involved. It's not markets determining prices, it's the government, and so a command system. Businesses are allowed to produce the goods and services they choose. This is the freedom of enterprise that occurs within a market system. Government is quite involved in the day-to-day lives of citizens. Command system. In our market system, the government is active but has a limited role. If we would say that our government is quite active in the day-to-day lives, that means we're in the command system. All right, so as we move forward, thinking about those different economic systems, there are 4 fundamental questions that every society then must ask. First, what goods and services will be produced? Next, how will those goods and services be produced? Then, who will get the goods and services? And how will the system promote progress? Again, with our command system, the government is the exact answer to most of these. What goods and services will be produced? A command system will say that it's the goods and services that the central planner says should be produced. The central planner then decides how they will be produced. The central planner decides who will get the goods and how much they will pay for them. And also, how will the system promote progress? This is thinking about technological advancement, and traditionally we see these command systems as more of a follower society as opposed to a leader in these industries. All right, but let's think about these 4 questions in terms of the market system. That's going to provide us with a little bit more context into, as we move forward, how we're thinking about supply and demand and all of the other pieces of the economics puzzle. All right, so first, what will be produced? So we're walking down the grocery aisle and there are tons of different goods and services available to us. We can think about Walmart and all the different goods that are produced. So what will be produced? How do we decide what will be produced? Well, that's exactly what the answer is. We decide. We use our dollars, and every time we purchase a product, we voted that that product be produced. As soon as we spend our dollars on that product, it's saying, I want that product and I want more of it. So our dollars, we use them to vote for the goods and services we want produced. So let's think about an example of the VCR. Once the DVD player was introduced, we used our dollars and we voted for DVDs. And we stopped voting for VCRs. Now you walk into a place like Walmart and you can't find a VCR anywhere in the place. And even DVD players are becoming a thing of the past. We have things like Amazon Prime and digital movies, Netflix, where we don't even need DVD players anymore. So our dollar votes are telling the economy as a whole what to produce. And that's the beauty of the market system. The beauty is that we're able to use our dollars as a one person in our entire society, and we can vote on what goods and services end up being produced. Next, how will the goods and services be produced? So will it be machines producing the goods and services, or will it be people? How do we determine how we will produce those goods and services that we've already decided after our dollar votes that we should produce? Well, in a market system, we use the method of production that minimizes costs. The most efficient technology and resources will be used to produce those goods and services. So whether it's using more capital and less labor, or more labor and less capital, how will the goods be produced? It's the most efficient, cost minimizing method of production. Then who will get the output? There's 2 pieces of the puzzle. When we think about who will get the output, it's willingness and ability. So you can see in the left-hand picture, you have to have the ability to purchase the product. If you don't have the money to purchase the product in a market system, you are unable to purchase the product. So if you can't afford something, then you don't get to buy it. So I can't afford a Tesla car. So since I can't afford it, I don't get to buy it. I do not have the ability to produce the good. The second piece of the puzzle is, do you have the willingness to purchase the product? So I might be able to afford to eat sardines every night for supper. I could afford that, but I'm not willing to do that. So I am not the one who gets the output. I don't want the output. So who gets the output? In a market system, you have to first have the ability, the income to purchase the product, but you also have the preference and the willingness to purchase the product. And then finally, how will the system promote progress? How can we increase the size of our economic pie. How can we produce more goods and services in the future than we are today? And this is all about technology and capital accumulation. And this is what we said is key within the market system. The market system promotes that self-interest that motivates us to try and strive for more income, more profits in the future. We do that through technological development and capital accumulation. All right, so the Soviet Union is one of our prime examples of a command system. And when I was in grad school, I heard this fabulous story that just described why there was a collapse of the command system, the Soviet Union. And it was all about underwear. So within the command system, we have a group of central planners, and this is our central planning committee, some of the top advisors in the Soviet Union. They made the decision on what goods and services were produced. And they said, let's produce equal amounts of men's and women's underwear. Well, in a market system, we can look at the United States and see that's probably not the best idea, right? Where do men buy their underwear? I don't know for sure, but we have stores that specialize in women's underwear. We don't see that with men's, right? And so when we have a central planning committee that's saying, let's make equal amounts of men's and women's underwear and let's just distribute them to society, that's not what society wants. This is just one example, but all of these pieces working together where individuals aren't receiving, they don't have the ability to purchase the goods and services they want, their economy, their government isn't working for them, that is when we see rebellions against. And that's one of the reasons why our command system doesn't work. The feedback mechanism of voting with our dollars isn't there. The motivation of individuals to strive for income isn't there. And so it is that motivation that drives the market system, that promotes happiness, that we can see within the market system that we don't see in the command system. All right, so we see the demise of the command system in Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, the fall of some of those countries, and even in China, as they've moved forward through time, they've moved away from that command system. Even though they consider themselves to be a communist country, they don't have an economic system that's as similar to the command system. They move towards a more open market system. And this is because the system was a failure. There was that coordination problem. The central planners didn't know what the individuals wanted. There wasn't that feedback mechanism where we stopped voting with our dollars for goods and services we don't want anymore. There's also incentive problems. When households don't own the factors of production, there's less incentive to strive to specialize and do your job well. And so the incentive problem also caused that failure within the command system. All right, so hopefully that